je suis ravi de vous retrouver pour une nouvelle session d'ADN Talk. Alors cette session, elle est un peu particulière parce que normalement, elles se font toutes en français, mais celle-ci sera en anglais. Parce qu'on a la chance d'accueillir Kirk aujourd'hui, qui vient tout droit d'Écosse, parce qu'il habite en Écosse et plus particulièrement, plus précisément à Glasgow. Donc il nous fait l'honneur d'être ici aujourd'hui parmi nous. Voilà. On a toujours privilégié les ADN Talk en présentiel et c'est ce qu'on va continuer à faire. So, now I'll switch into English. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, because I think you've connected from different places of the world. So, we're really happy to welcome you today. It's going to be a session in English, and we are fortunate, we are glad, we're really pleased to welcome Kirk Kinnell. Kirk, I don't know where to start with, is a great, an excellent and fabulous professional negotiator, is a friend of mine, he's a good friend of mine. So I'm really pleased to have him here today with us, and he's going to share with us his experience and his expertise on negotiation, especially complex negotiation. So, good evening, Kirk.
Well, good evening, Marwan.
How are you?
I'm wonderful, and thank you for inviting me along to your talk. It's my honour and pleasure to be part of this and part of your, esteemed audience. I'm happy to participate and help in any way I can.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, Kirk, I know you, but people might not know you, right? So, if you can just introduce yourself, right? What you do, where you come from, and then I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
So just to introduce myself, I'm Kirk Kinnell. I am the former head of hostage negotiation and armed policing in Scotland. I basically have a background of 25, 30 years as both the operational and the training arms of both hostage negotiation and armed policing, and eventually retired as the head of armed policing in Scotland. I, over that time, was exposed to 250, maybe 300 siege incidents where people's lives were at risk, and we managed to resolve them safely. But with all of that experience in the hostage negotiation world, I also spent some time on the UK team, on the international working group, which was the global team, where we went around the world sharing experiences from the hostage negotiation teams around the world and ensuring that we all had a product which was fit for purpose and similar, so that when we were operating, we could be independent and interdependent. And in the last 3 or 4 years of my police service, I spent advising the US law enforcement team who were trying to manage the resolution of conflict, so that there was a lot of pressure on them from the Black Lives Matter movement to resolve conflict differently. And they saw some of the conflict resolution techniques that we were using in Scotland, and they transferred that into US law enforcement, and I was the lead advisor on that. And then when I retired, I extended my life into becoming a professional negotiator. The skills that I had learned over all of these years and all of that experience was too good to leave behind. and I had to keep it going. It's something that made me tick over the years. So I initially set up my own company, Negotiated Resolutions. And, after a year or so, I met you, Marwan, and became an associate of the ADN group. And for me, it was a perfect fit because your philosophy in negotiation exactly matched my philosophy of negotiating with integrity, considering we can come up with solutions which help people who are disadvantaged, and we help them come to a resolution which is hopefully fair for everyone, but we will make sure we will look after the best outcome possible. So using all of those skills and transferring that into the corporate world was a transition. And of course, you helped me with that transition, because not only was your operational experience in that environment, but your academic research, all of that really pointed towards that goal. And it's something that, you know, I'm still taking lots of pleasure in, and lots of pleasure not only being deployed as a negotiator for hire, but also training teams. So we do both of those things.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much, guys. It's an honor to have you in the team as well, honestly. So as you have noticed, Kirk is from Scotland, right? With its accent. I hope you stay here. You haven't left because of his accent. I'm joking, of course. I'm joking. I love his accent, right? Because I was a big fan of Braveheart, right? You might know Braveheart with Mel Gibson, but he's not Scott, but anyway. And so sometimes we just making fun of his accent. Right, so Kirk, I know one thing. You have dealt with more than 200 incidents, right? Hostage taking situation, retrenched people, madmen, suicidal guys, and so on and so forth, right? You have as well negotiated for the private sector, okay? And I remember some negotiation where the two of us were involved in, right? Do you have any negotiation you'd like to share with us? Because it was particularly impactful for you or meaningful, right? And hopefully a successful negotiation, right? If you have to come up with something in your mind, don't hesitate to share that with us.
Thank you. Yeah, listen, absolutely. And it's something that clearly I've thought about over and over again. But I think back to when I was a young armed officer on the armed response teams. And I was at a siege in Glasgow. And I remember the approach that we took was about giving instructions to people and almost forcing them to comply. And this male was non-compliant, and we were giving instructions with no real effect. And then the hostage negotiator team arrived on the scene, and our job, of course, was to protect them. But I noticed almost instantly a change in the wind. I noticed they were able to influence this man who was super aggressive. He was mentally ill. He was on drink and drugs, but they connected with him and resolved this siege where he was armed with a gun. He was threatening to blow up the building with the gas. But I saw that they connected with him. And I realized at that moment, wow, I want to do that job. That's what I want to do.
So that was the trigger.
That was the trigger, absolutely. I saw the impact they had on him, and they used tools which at that point in time, I was not in possession of. I had never seen such a dramatic impact. And so I decided I want to be a hostage negotiator, and I applied to become a hostage negotiator. And at the time, it was slightly controversial because in law enforcement, they say, you have to be that or that. You can't do both, right? And I was like, well, I want to do both. And they eventually let me do both. And what I learned was that all of the skills that I was learning as a hostage negotiator, as a young man, I was able to transfer those into the armed policing environment and make them deal with conflict differently and better. But for me, it was impactful right away when I saw the impact that could have. And then maybe about 5 or 6 years later, I was at a siege in a different area of Glasgow. And it was a siege that had lasted almost 48 hours of a man with a gun. Again, he was shooting the weapon out of the window, and the armed team were there. And this time I was there as a hostage negotiator. And I went on one evening for about 6 or 8 hours. Our initial objective was to stabilize him because he was erratic and all over the place. And at the end of my shift, I went home and went to bed and woke up in the morning and was told, go back to the scene, it's still going. So I went back to the scene for a second day, and eventually the drugs had worn off and he had become a bit more stabilized. And I was fortunate enough to be able to close the deal and secure his arrest. But what was most impactful about that particular job, that particular incident, was that that man knew that he was going to jail for 10 years. And I was able to understand him. I was able to understand what made him tick. And for him, it was important that he went to jail with high status, of course. And so for me, when I was able to recognize that that was important to him, we were able to arrange his arrest in a way which was choreographed to be violent and aggressive, but the weapon was kept to the side deliberately. And so that he received his arrest, with pleasure. He went to jail smiling with pleasure. And, people around me said, how did you manage to connect with him? And I was able to explain, I was able to connect with him because he gave me his values, all of the things which mattered to him. And he clearly told me status was important without telling me the words status is important to me. So that was, for me, a use of the negotiation skills that we teach and we use, but that was happening live at a critical, life-threatening instant. And I saw a complete change in his mindset. So that left a mark with me that gave me confidence that the skills work in the most extreme circumstances. And so that's very memorable. And I suppose the next impactful moment was when I transitioned into the corporate world. And it was a corporate role that you and I worked on with ADN, where I was given a corporate contract to negotiate an organization that where the court of arbitration had decided that they must pay a 9-figure sum to another organization. And we managed to have the company get out of that contract at no further cost through the same negotiation skills, which were identical to the hostage negotiation world. But I was using them in the corporate world, and again, getting evidence that they were really impactful, because the very thing that caused the other organizations to be defensive, well, they gave away all of their values, they gave away all of their clues, and I was able to find a solution which arranged for them both to separate but remain in good terms. So all the things that we talk about is that being fair, building sustainable relationships, recognizing that we can repair damage that's done. Well, all of these things came into glorious color for me. And so they're most impactful, because even that one that I dealt with, to be involved in a contract negotiation for a 9-figure sum initially for me was overwhelming. And my first engagement, I was met with 4 very big lawyers and 2 negotiators at the other side of the table, and basically drew the confidence to deal with that situation based on my skills and expertise and all of the things that we had learned and shared, but also the fact that I was part of an experienced team and that we would be on that journey together. Because for me, one of the things that I've learned in hostage negotiation is the presence of humility, and that you're part of a team, because it's never about ego, it's never about you on your own performance. And when all of these things come true, then it reassures me that all that we've been doing for the last 10, 20, 30 years, then it's pressure tested to the most extreme circumstances, and it always comes good. So for me, that gave me a reassurance that all that we do and all that we teach, I was living that life. I was living the most complex negotiation and was virtually seeing the evidence that it was being alive and shown to be true. And then I suppose you asked me about, maybe something in that where my memories of the experience of jobs which are either a failure or leave a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, that's a sense, yeah.
Yeah, and again, for me, that's a job that you and I were involved in.
Yeah.
And so you're not a jinx, because you share my good memory, so you'll also share my bad memory. But it was it was where a young boy had been kidnapped in Afghanistan, of course you remember, and we were contacted by a media organisation and a female in particular who came across the story and was asking for help. And you and I became engaged with that individual. We were trying to negotiate his release from captivity. And as the negotiation went on, our instincts started to tingle around about the story. And when we challenged some aspects of the story, it transpired that the father who was asking for help actually was withholding information from us. He knew more about the story than he had revealed to us. He actually eventually revealed that he believed the captor was his brother-in-law. And then for me, the last sickening event in that was that he valued his own illegal fortune over the life of his son.
Yeah.
And for me, I almost lost my faith in humanity, but thankfully it's been restored through all of the work we do with the humanitarian people and the organizations, where you realize that people are capable of anything. So the bitter taste for me was that, yeah, he disengaged from us. He wouldn't allow us to help him anymore because he had more to hide. And I think for me, not just the deceit, but the value that he placed on his own son over his illegal fortune that he had gathered was, for me, yeah, it's still, you can probably tell, it still sits with me now.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember the story because I remember some elements of this negotiation. You know, when he said, "Now is in your hand. It is in God's hand." So I'm not his father anymore. And we had to deal with some expressions, some sentences that the father used regarding his son. And as a father, because you only project yourself when you negotiate, sometimes it's difficult with life and death situation, especially when you have children. So basically, when they are retaining children, you sometimes project yourself and say, okay, if I fail, those children, they might never see their mother, their father again, right? And say, okay, it can be me as well. And so we do sometimes project ourselves. And the thing in this negotiation is that the way the father spoke about his son, it was a bit, I don't know if I can find the word, but it was disappointing, if I may say so. But this is sometimes, you know, when you do negotiate with people and you realize at the end that you have been working with the wrong guys. Yeah. And especially not the good guys, but you realize that later. But anyway, that's part of the negotiation.
And I recall when he raised that question and told us, I told the hostage takers, just keep him. He's in the hands of God. It's nothing to do with me anymore. And I remember the shock in your face, and you said to him, perhaps we could have selected better words for that. And you were just about, you know, we gave him the skills and we gave him some phrases to use, but it was his lack of consideration because he had abdicated his responsibility. And for you and I, we were struggling to adjust with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And we had, of course, we adjusted, but it caught me cold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's why those kind of negotiations leave a bitter taste, if I may say, a bit of bitterness.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we would have imagined this negotiation would have taken another turn. But anyway, that is life. Yeah, that is life. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. Okay. If we have time, I'll ask you to share another negotiation with us, but I have other questions for you. Right, I know these questions. I know you ask these questions all the time because as a professional negotiator, journalists or participants that we can train, or just when we just share stories about the job we do, people say, but what does it take to be a good negotiator, right? What does it take? Okay, so we all have a different explanation. I have mine, of course, but I'll have to get yours, please.
Yeah, so what does it take to be a good negotiator? For me, it's a combination of things. It can never just be one thing. So it's understanding the process, understanding your objective and your goals, understanding the environment that you're in, the position of your counterpart, whatever that may be. But in terms of all of the skills, for me, I think the most relevant one is the skill of listening. So for me, most of the time, that has given the most dividend to help me understand the perspective of other people. And so when I listen to people like a hostage negotiator in the corporate world, it yields a lot of information, a lot of intelligence that, of course, we can use to both our advantage and their advantage. But it helps me find solutions. And that skill itself has helped me understand myself, my counterpart, but in actual fact, it probably helps me understand my family a bit more. It's without doubt helped me interact with people a bit differently, because even though as a young hostage negotiator, I always understood listening, I understood my interaction with other people. And the key ingredient was to do that with authenticity.
Yeah.
And being empathetic with authenticity, well, the definition actually changed for me over time, because understanding empathy, which I know you share my understanding, is about recognizing the emotions of others and the context of those emotions and being able to articulate that where it's recognized by them. But in actual fact, being authentic is sometimes being emotional too. And so I think the combination of listening and being authentic certainly helps me understand people, but absolutely helps me connect with people. And I think that's the most important thing, because human beings, being social animals, I like to connect with people. And so when I become better at that, when I pay attention to people, when I understand them a bit more, I don't get things wrong so often. And I now recognize that if I was able to give that advice to a younger version of me, it would be be patient, try and spend a bit of time understanding people, interpret what they're saying, not just literally, but the hidden meanings, which are always in conversation. And I did that professionally, but I suppose when that transitioned to doing it more personally, then it absolutely helped my relationships and made things less difficult for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. So if I have to sum up what you said, so you said, yeah, listening skills super important just to get to understand the perspectives of the opposing party. You're talking about empathy, right? Authentic empathy. And so those are the two big elements, right? And if you had to add up more elements, when you talk about, I don't know, self-control, emotions management, when you talk about assertiveness, do you have something that come up to your mind?
Absolutely. So I think for me, the control that I have of my emotions was almost like, possibly initially, I would control my emotions too much.
Okay.
So now I've learned that all I should really do is manage those emotions. I can't be a robot and have no emotions. So I now manage them. I now know my own triggers, the things which get me hot under the collar. Simple things like, when children are being harmed, then I become over emotional and angry, and I realize that will get in the way. And so I understand that not just empathy and listening, but self-control, assertiveness, and it's something that I taught my daughter in particular, who was a sweetheart and a clever girl, but she was very passive. And I saw the turmoil within her when she was being passive all of the time. And I taught her some skills about being assertive. And for her, I said, you will be the nicest type of assertive, because you'll be the kindest girl, that you use beautiful words and compassionate words when you disagree with someone.
Yeah.
So all of these things, and not only that, recognizing how to move the balance of power in your favor. So all of the tools I think that we teach, I think they're all relevant. And for me, the skills are all interactive. It's like a menu that you take.
Yeah.
You never use them all of the time, but I use most of them most of the time. So that whole process, and I think, you know, for you, you have absolutely captured that in the Pacificat, mnemonic that you have. You've captured all of the key elements and the most important elements of a negotiation, start to finish, and the ingredients. Everyone knows that menu that they can take all of these bits or some of them, but they use it in context of their own situation. So for me, it's very difficult to say only one thing, because it's actually everything. It's knowing the whole journey and when to use which tool, to the point right now where I hope they're just selected naturally. You know, you just instinctively know what's the most appropriate tool to use and when to use it and how strong to be with certain things. So for the listeners out there who, you know, some of them will be experienced negotiators, most of them, if not all of them, will have an interest in negotiation. Probably for me, the pursuit of excellence is constant. Always learning, always keen to learn from different people. I'm curious about different styles and different perspectives on negotiation. And I think for me, and again, I don't want to give you too many compliments on your show. Yeah, but for me, your approach and the ADN approach encaptures all of the things which are good about negotiation, and you eliminate the things which are bad or unproductive. You know, so I think for me, that philosophy that you have connects with me, and that's why I'm, you know, delighted to be associated with the International Group of Negotiations, the ADN Group, all of the people who just think about life the same way. It doesn't have to be difficult. We don't have to be, you know, only focused on money or contracts or transactions. We're a people-based organization, and that's good for me.
Yeah. And the pleasure is deeply shared. Yeah, you have to know that. Pleasure is shared, honestly. Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you very much. I have another question, of course. We're just looking at the time, because just don't want to impose upon your time, as the Queen might say, with a typical English accent.
Yeah, your English is always better than mine.
No, I'd love to speak like you. But anyway, yeah. We talked about when we think about negotiation, we think about influencing others, right? We think about manipulating others. We think about persuading others as well, okay? So there are a lot of words, right, referring to negotiation, but most of the time people say, right, what is the difference between influence and manipulation, right? So if I've got to ask you this question, what is for you, Kirk, my dear friend, the difference between influence and manipulation?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it's something which is dear to my heart. And I know you share that philosophy. So for me, influence is about provoking change in behavior, so that there is mutual benefit for you and the counterpart. We always want to improve a relationship, get a better deal, do something which is fair. And that influence may sometimes be harsh on bad behavior, because we want to be harsh on bad actors in the game. We don't want to be soft and fluffy with everyone. We have to sometimes be harsh and be able to influence the bad behavior of people in the game. But manipulation for me is where, from the outset, people are seeking to influence the behavior of other people only for their own personal gain. And I see that in a lot of the negotiation training, which is available through different companies right now, who are teaching people tricks and almost like street trading tips, how to trick people into saying yes. And it drives me crazy, I have to say. So for me, it's never about getting what you want out of people. It's about doing something which is good for everyone. And the way that I talk about it in training is to say the difference between influence and manipulation. And I learned this from this story comes from one of my other friends, Richard, who first told me this story. He said, if you think about Star Wars, and it's the same power. Darth Vader uses the power for bad, and Luke Skywalker uses the power for good. So we are Luke Skywalker. and I want people to remember that we are Luke Skywalker. The good negotiators don't manipulate people. We influence behavior for the benefit of everyone. Sometimes that's tough, but that fairness isn't always even. It's not always nice, but most of the time it's nice. And we use kind, compassionate words, and we'll always be hard on the point, but soft on the person.
Yeah, exactly. And I love your definition as well. So of course, yeah, we share the same one. And it makes me think of something when you say that, is that when we talk about like soft negotiation, because our job is to stabilize people, right? Is to provoke change, right? Is to shape their perception so they can accept maybe sometimes a degraded solution, but it's still acceptable for them because they do consider it fair, right? And the thing is, fairness is all relative because it might be fair for others, and for others, it might not be fair. But the thing is, when we talk about soft negotiation, people might think of us, we're soft negotiators. And basically, we we have to submit to others. Of course, it's not the case, and as you say that. We are assertive negotiators, right? We never yield ground, right? We're always in the place, right? And we have to make a difference. So what I like about your approach is you don't have to be tough when they're not tough. But when we have to deal with tough people, we use tough skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that I've become more comfortable saying, because I didn't ever want to be perceived as manipulative, because I don't like that image. But yeah, I'll be tough when there are bad actors in the game, and they require toughness to make them realize that they can't, enforce their extortion tactics on us, because we learn how to outmaneuver them. I have spent 20 years in law enforcement dealing with people who are extortionists. So the tactics we have are good for that. We can still be pleasant and choose nice words, but deliver some sadness vouchers.
Yeah. I love that. Kirk, as you said, that you have a huge experience in negotiation, right? And in the private sector and in the law enforcement world, right? So how negotiation has changed your life, right? You've talked a bit of that early when we started ADN Talk, but if you have to look back like 30 years before and now, has it changed your life, negotiation? Because, sorry for that, but I like to say that being a negotiator is being a better version of yourself. That's one thing.
For you, absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't want to give you hints how to answer these questions, of course, but I'd like to get your
Yeah, you don't have to give me hints. I know where you need me to go with this. But no, listen, absolutely. Has it made me a better version of myself? I have to be honest and say that would not be a big challenge, right? So as a young man, I was probably aggressive, confrontational, all of the things that I perceived to be strong. But over time, I have learned that strength is in being compassionate. It's in being understanding other people, and sometimes using kind words. Previously, I would perceive that as being soft, but I realized that my strength, I'm more secure in me. So I can be compassionate, I can be soft, and I think it makes me a bit more understanding of others, a bit more intelligent. How has that changed my life? Well, without doubt, it has changed me as a person, because I understand me a bit better. But also, it has presented lots of opportunities for me to have a fabulous life. Now along with you, I travel the world. It has given me an insight into a corporate arena that as a young man from Glasgow, I never dreamed I would have exposure to. But also it has helped my relationships, the ability to recognize where I need to show humility, where sometimes I understood it but didn't practice it as much. So I think that self-analysis, that actual self-analysis, rather than saying, I've got some self-awareness and I know I do this and I know I do that, but desire to improve. I think negotiation has given me the courage to understand myself, make improvements, and become a better person. As I say, it would not have been difficult, maybe as a young man. Absolutely, I would be difficult to be around and a difficult challenge. I probably thought I had to be tough in law enforcement. But as I got older, I recognized that that didn't have much value really in the big bad world, and it gave me the courage to be probably softer and gentle, but still firm.
Yeah,
and I think that was important.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So just looking at the time, right? I have two other questions. Right? Okay. I know you spent a bit of time at the FBI, right? I know you got trained there as well.
Yeah.
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 Because you're humble. Because if Kirk has to share with us all his experience, it would take more than 2 hours. So we're not here for that. But yes, so Kirk, you've been trained by the FBI. Yes. Is there an experience you'd like to share with us? Because when we think about the FBI, there's a lot of things, because there are the American movies, a lot of things, and I don't know if there's something, a single story, or you'd like to share with us with your experience there?
About my experience with the FBI. Listen, absolutely, I've got a lot of stories. So I went across to the FBI 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
And it was an instructor exchange program. So they sent an instructor to Scotland, and we sent our instructor to Quantico, and I was the instructor that went to Quantico. So I went there as a student, but also as a part-time instructor for their team and integrated with their team. And, a lot of that team were very experienced, doing lots of good things in the world. And I'm still really good friends with one of the instructors on the course. In fact, Mike McComas, I know you've met Mike before, and he's part of my team. So at first I went there absolutely in awe of the FBI, the reputation and everything that came with that. And to be honest with you, the learning that I took from the FBI was probably not as much as I had expected. Their reputation was massive. They had great instructors, great operational people. But I realized that what we were teaching in Scotland, what we taught when I did the London course, when I was a teacher on that with Scotland Yard, and then what I went on to teach in different countries around the world, all of the different nations were kind of teaching the same thing. However, in the UK in the last 10 years, we had advanced much more because the FBI were still relying on the skills that were initially derived from their behavioural science unit at Quantico. And when it was invented 25 years ago, it was ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. But it was so ahead of its time that, I'm not really sure it evolved at the pace I would expect it to evolve at. And so most of the European forces were advancing. And as a consequence, that's obviously why when US law enforcement came to Scotland to learn more about conflict resolution, they learned it from me and from Scotland rather than on their doorstep. Yeah. So for me, that was an impactful moment when I thought that the skills that they would require was within their own ranks. But in actual fact, it wasn't, because they were still teaching things like the active listening skills, which are relevant, but so outdated that most of the active listening skills that they were teaching were actually not even listening skills. Some of them were behavioural skills and conversation skills. But yeah, listen, great respect for them, great respect for all the people across there, and still in regular contact with Mike, who still works with us on a couple of jobs. But yeah, great experiences in the USA, and yeah, it was memorable, to say the least.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And as a last question, is there a piece of advice you'd like to give to people listening to us, right? Because we've talked for almost 45 minutes now, right? It went so fast, right?
Quickly.
And is there a piece of advice you'd like to give to people listening to us as a negotiator?
Yeah, so as a negotiator, I think the best piece of advice I would give to you, as I would give to a younger version of me, is to continually learn your trade. Seek professional qualifications, educate yourself, read as many books as you can on negotiation, develop your own philosophy. No one person has the answer. No one person has the perfect answer for you. You have to keep searching for that. But I think as you do that, retain that curiosity, but also constantly reevaluate you, reevaluate yourself to keep yourself grounded, ensure that you have humility. Because the minute that you lose that humility, you start to ignore the perspective of others. You start to think about your own perspective. You award yourself power that you're not entitled to do. And soon it becomes the point where you become distracted from your main goal, which is helping other people. So for me, who spent 25 years saving lives on people on the edge of a bridge, win-win or win-lose was never a thing for me. No one would ever lose. We're just helping people. And I think for me, I want to retain that philosophy of helping people as I go through life. And the way to do that is to just retain grounded, retain humility, and be interested in other people.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kirk. Thank you very much for your participation. It was such a great pleasure to have you here. Right, I could listen to you for hours, you know that, and but unfortunately, we're almost, I think, it's more than 45 minutes now. So yeah, it was a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Kirk, and we'll have dinner now together.
Yeah, that's good, and I even love your accent. Well, you call me Kirker, and it makes my name sound exotic. So your French accent is wonderful. So thank you, and thank you for the participants, all of you online, for joining us and listening to this story. And I hope that I've been able to share a little bit of something that might inspire you to keep going, stay resilient, stay strong, and make that journey of improvement continuous. Keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Strength and honor, as we said it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.